Luella Fanning had a way of blending into the scenery. At Crestwood Academy, nestled in quiet Albany, New York, she navigated the halls unnoticed, her slender figure lost in roomy cardigans, her auburn hair a veil across her face. Few students paid her any mind. Those who did saw her as a shy, unassuming girl who liked her own company. Unbeknownst to them, Luella moved with the practiced ease of someone trained to observe before engaging. Her seemingly demure stance concealed a readiness honed through years of rigorous self-defense practice, a world removed from mere timidity. The relaxed way she carried her hands, the automatic survey of exits upon entering a room, these were habits born of disciplined training. 3 months into the semester, Luella still felt like an outsider. Relocating to Albany after her mother's new job had been tough, especially navigating the cliques of Crestwood. The endless drama of her peers held no appeal. She preferred her studies and the occasional video call with her older sister, a nurse working abroad. The initial spark ignited in the bustling school atrium one Wednesday morning. Luella sat by a towering indoor ficus tree, eating a simple pastry while engrossed in a book about martial arts techniques, when the unmistakable voice of Bryn Hawthorne echoed across the open space. Bryn was Luella's opposite, statuesque, popular, seemingly effortlessly commanding attention. She captained the cheerleading squad and radiated the self-assurance of someone who'd never faced uncertainty. "Check out the newbie," Bryn announced, her voice projecting for all to hear. "Still solo, I see. What's the book about? How to be popular for dummies." Her entourage, Paige Mallory and Quinn Sterling, erupted in laughter, their voices carrying like a pack of mockingbirds. Luella didn't glance up, but her fingers tightened around her book. She'd encountered bullies before. The best tactic was always to ignore them, to deny them the satisfaction of a reaction. Yet Bryn's tone, the possessive way she spoke as if she ruled the school, made Luella's grip on the book intensify. "I'm talking to you," Bryn persisted, a sharp edge entering her tone as Luella remained unresponsive. "It's impolite to ignore someone trying to be friendly." Paige, a wiry girl with piercing blue eyes, chimed in. "Maybe she can't hear us. Maybe she's lost in her little book." The remark drew more laughter, and Luella felt her pulse quicken. They knew nothing of her personal life, but their snide remarks stung more than she wanted to admit. Still, she stayed silent, deliberately turning a page. This only seemed to infuriate Bryn further. She pushed herself up from her seat, the metal legs screeching against the polished floor, and began to walk towards Luella. The atrium fell into that tense hush that signals an impending confrontation. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Bryn repeated, now towering over Luella's table. She reached out and slammed the book shut, the sudden noise echoing in the quiet space. "When someone's trying to be nice, you should respond." Luella looked up, her hazel eyes meeting Bryn's with a steady gaze that made Bryn momentarily falter. There was something in her eyes. Not fear, not rage, but a calculating assessment that made Bryn feel like she was being measured by someone who saw through her facade. "I heard you," Luella said softly, her controlled tone making the words more unsettling than a shout. "I just have nothing to say to you." The dismissal clearly threw Bryn off balance. She was used to reactions, tears, defiance, anger, but this calm indifference was new. It made her feel diminished, and that fueled her anger. "You think you're better than us," she demanded, her voice rising. "Just because you're some loner doesn't mean you can act like you're too good for this school." Luella bent to retrieve her book, her movements graceful and precise. "I never said I was better than anyone," she replied, still in that soft voice. "I just want to read in peace." But Bryn wasn't finished. Something about Luella's composure, the way she refused to give her the reaction she craved, made Bryn feel like she was losing face in front of everyone. She reached out and swept Luella's plate off the table, sending the pastry skittering across the floor. "Whoops," she said with false innocence. "Looks like you made a mess. Maybe you should clean that up." The atrium was silent, every student watching to see what would happen next. Luella looked at the scattered crumbs of her pastry, then back at Bryn. For a split second something flickered in her eyes, a flash of something that made Paige and Quinn unconsciously take a step back. Then it was gone, and Luella was simply the quiet new girl again. She stood, gathered her things, and left the atrium without a word, leaving Bryn standing there, her victory feeling strangely hollow. As she walked away, several students noticed something Bryn had missed. Luella's walk was different, not the slumped gait of a defeated victim, but the deliberate stride of someone thinking, planning, biding their time. The incidents grew more frequent over the next few weeks. Bryn seemed determined to make Luella's life miserable, as if her refusal to break was a challenge she couldn't ignore. She would shove Luella in the hallways, hard enough to make her drop her books, but not quite hard enough to warrant a reprimand. She would make snide comments about her clothes, her quiet demeanor, her lack of friends. Paige and Quinn followed her lead, creating a triangle of harassment that seemed to trap Luella wherever she went. They would crowd her at her locker, blocking her access. They would save seats in classes, then move their bags at the last second, forcing her to sit alone. The teachers seemed oblivious, or perhaps they chose to ignore it. Mr. Harrison, the history teacher, would clear his throat when Bryn made her remarks, but he never intervened directly. Mrs. Davies, who taught English, seemed to think the girls were just being playful when they offered to help Luella with her homework, missing the sarcasm completely. However, one teacher noticed everything. Ms. Simone Moreau taught advanced art history and had been at Crestwood for 5 years. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with a quirky style that favored vintage dresses and bold jewelry. She wore her dark hair in braids and had a calming, attentive way of speaking that reminded Luella of some of the instructors she'd had at her self-defense classes. Ms. Moreau had watched the situation unfold with growing concern. She recognized the signs, the way Luella carried herself, the controlled responses, the calculated way she moved through the school. More importantly, she recognized the glint in Bryn's eyes, the escalating nature of her behavior, and the way the other students were starting to see the harassment as entertainment. Ms. Moreau was the first to notice the silk scarf. Luella had started wearing it in early November as the Albany weather turned crisp. It was a beautiful vintage piece, emerald green silk with intricate floral patterns, clearly a treasured possession. The scarf was long and flowing, and Luella wore it draped around her neck, tucked into a cardigan. Ms. Moreau had a passion for textiles and recognized the scarf immediately. It was a rare design from a renowned artisan, the kind that held sentimental value. The fact that Luella wore it suggested it belonged to someone special, someone she admired. The scarf became another target for Bryn's harassment. She would make comments about it being outdated, about Luella trying to look sophisticated when she was clearly just a country bumpkin. She would tug on the ends of the scarf when she passed her in the hallway, or grab it when Luella was at her locker. "What's with the rag?" she would say. "Trying to be fancy?" Luella's reaction was always the same. Silence, that unwavering gaze, and then she would continue with whatever she was doing. But Ms. Moreau noticed that her jaw would clench when Bryn mentioned the scarf, and her hands would ball into fists before she consciously relaxed them. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon in December. Luella was heading towards the bus stop after school, her backpack slung over her shoulder, the scarf tucked snugly around her neck. She was thinking about the upcoming holidays, about the video call she had planned with her sister, about the art project that was due the following week. She didn't see Bryn, Paige, and Quinn until it was too late. They were waiting by the bike racks, clearly planning this. As Luella walked past, Bryn stepped out in front of her, blocking her path. "Hey, fancy pants," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Nice scarf. Where'd you get it? The thrift store." Luella tried to go around her, but Paige moved to block her from the left and Quinn moved to the right. They had her trapped between the bike racks and the school, with no easy escape. "I asked you a question," Bryn continued, her voice hardening. "Don't you think it's rude to ignore people?" "I just want to go home," Luella said quietly, her voice steady despite the situation. "Please move." But Bryn was beyond reason. Something about Luella's continued composure, her refusal to show fear, had been eating at her for weeks. She reached out and grabbed the scarf, pulling Luella towards her. "You think you're so cool in this thing," she said, her face inches from Luella's. "Let's see how cool you really are." What happened next would be whispered throughout Crestwood for weeks. Bryn yanked hard on the scarf, trying to pull it off Luella's neck. The delicate silk, weakened with age, couldn't withstand the force. The scarf tore, the sound of ripping fabric echoing off the walls. But it was what fell out of the torn scarf that made Paige and Quinn stop in their tracks. Several small, intricately carved wooden animals tumbled to the ground, a bear, a wolf, a bird, each one painstakingly crafted. The figures had been carefully tucked inside the scarf, wrapped in tissue paper like precious treasures. Luella dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the figures with trembling hands. For the first time since she had arrived at Crestwood, her composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the wooden bear to her chest. "Those were my grandfather's," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "He carved them for me. He's gone now. Those were all I had left." The words struck the three girls like a punch. Bryn stood frozen, the torn scarf in her hands, finally grasping the magnitude of what she had done. Paige and Quinn had backed away, their faces pale with shock. But Bryn, instead of apologizing, seemed to panic at the sight of Luella's tears. In her mind, she had finally gotten the reaction she wanted, and a twisted part of her felt vindicated. "Well, maybe you shouldn't wear dead people's stuff to school," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's kind of weird." The cruelty of the comment seemed to break something in Luella. She looked up at Bryn, her eyes no longer sad, but blazing with a fury that made all three girls involuntarily step back. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "No idea at all." She stood slowly, the torn scarf falling from Bryn's numb fingers. As she rose, something fundamental seemed to shift in her posture. The timid slouch was gone, replaced by the bearing of someone trained to stand tall, to face down far more dangerous opponents than high school bullies. "You want to know about these animals?" Adishi continued, her voice growing stronger. "My grandfather carved each one with his own hands. He taught me that strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves. He taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. He was a kind man." Paige and Quinn were retreating now, sensing that something had changed in a way they didn't understand. But Bryn, whether from shock or stubborn pride, held her ground. "So what?" she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "That doesn't give you the right to act like you're better than everyone else." Luella looked at her for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm and controlled. "You're right about one thing. I have been acting like I'm better than you, but that's because I am better than you. I'm better than someone who would destroy something that means the world to someone else just to feel powerful." She began to walk towards Bryn, and something in her movement made Bryn's eyes widen. It wasn't the walk of a victim anymore. It was the deliberate advance of someone who had been trained to neutralize threats. "You want to know what else?" she continued, still moving forward. "I've been holding back this whole time, not because I'm scared of you, but because I was taught that violence should be a last resort, used only when all other options have been exhausted, but you just crossed a line I can't ignore." Bryn finally realized she was in serious trouble. The girl walking towards her wasn't the timid victim she had been tormenting. This was someone who moved with fluid grace, someone whose calm demeanor was far more frightening than any angry outburst. "Look, I didn't mean," she started, but Luella cut her off. "Yes, you did," she said simply. "You meant to hurt me, to humiliate me, to make me feel as small as you obviously feel inside. The difference is, I know how to handle bullies like you." She was close enough now that Bryn could see the controlled fury in her eyes. Without warning, she moved, not with the flailing motions of an angry teenager, but with the precise, efficient movements of someone trained in martial arts. Her first move was deceptively simple. She stepped inside Bryn's reach and delivered a swift kick to her ankle, throwing her off balance. Before Bryn could recover, she grabbed her arm and executed a textbook wrist lock, forcing her to her knees with a pain that shot up her arm. "This is called a wrist lock," she explained in a conversational tone, as if giving a lesson. "It's designed to control someone without causing permanent damage. The more you resist, the more it hurts." Paige and Quinn surged forward, but Luella's eyes snapped to them with such intensity that they froze. "I wouldn't," she said calmly. "I can handle all three of you if I have to, but I'd prefer not to. Your friend here has learned her lesson, haven't you, Bryn?" Bryn was panting and trying to nod, the pain in her arm making it clear she was completely at Luella's mercy. Around them, other students had gathered to watch, their faces showing a mixture of awe and fear. "I want you to understand something," Luella continued, still maintaining the hold. "I could have done this any time in the past few months. I could have ended your little game the first day you decided to make me your target, but I didn't, because I was taught that violence should be a last resort, used only when all other options have failed." She released the hold and stepped back, allowing Bryn to slump forward, clutching her arm, but she wasn't finished. "Stand up," she commanded, and something in her voice made it clear this wasn't a request. Bryn struggled to her feet, her face pale and her breathing ragged. Luella stood before her. No longer the quiet girl who tried to disappear. She was someone who had been trained to command respect, to project authority, to make others listen. "You destroyed something that belonged to my grandfather," she said, her voice carrying across the bike rack area. "Something that represented his love, his skill, his memory. You did it because you thought I was weak, because you thought I wouldn't fight back." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong about me being weak, but you were right about me not wanting to fight. I don't enjoy hurting people, even people who deserve it. That's what separates me from you." By now, a crowd had formed. Students who had watched Bryn torment Luella for months were seeing her in a completely different light. Ms. Moreau had also arrived, drawn by the commotion, but she didn't intervene. She recognized what was happening, not just a fight, but a lesson that needed to be learned. "I want you to pick up every piece of my grandfather's carvings," Luella continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "Every figure, every scrap of wood, and then I want you to apologize. Not to me, but to his memory." Bryn looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Luella's eyes made it clear her options were limited. She knelt and began gathering the scattered carvings, her movements clumsy and hesitant. Paige and Quinn remained frozen, realizing their friend had picked a fight with someone far more dangerous than they had imagined. The girl they had helped torment wasn't just quiet. She was controlled, disciplined, and capable of violence they couldn't even comprehend. As Bryn handed her the gathered figures, Luella took them with reverence. She examined each carving, as if seeing them anew. Then she looked back at Bryn, and her expression softened slightly. "My grandfather taught me that strength isn't about dominating others," she said quietly. "It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. You could learn from that." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the three girls. "This ends here. You leave me alone, you leave other people alone, and maybe you'll learn what real strength looks like. But if you ever, and I mean ever, decide to target someone else the way you targeted me, you'll discover I have a lot more training than what you saw today." The threat was delivered in the same calm, controlled tone she had used throughout the confrontation, but it carried a weight that made all three girls nod quickly. As Luella walked away, the crowd parted before her. The transformation was complete, no longer the quiet girl who tried to blend in, but someone who commanded respect through strength, discipline, and moral courage. Ms. Moreau followed her, and when they were out of earshot of the other students, she spoke softly. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. Luella looked at her with surprise, and Ms. Moreau smiled. "I recognize the bearing, the training, the way you handled that situation. Your grandfather taught you well?" "He taught me that strength should be used to protect people, not to hurt them," Luella replied, echoing what she had said to Bryn. "I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted her to understand. And now she does," Ms. Moreau said. "Sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to show them they've picked the wrong target. But you did something more. You showed her that real strength comes from restraint, from knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere at Crestwood changed. Bryn, Paige, and Quinn seemed to have lost their taste for bullying, and other students began to treat Luella with respect and curiosity. She was no longer invisible. People knew who she was and what she stood for. More importantly, she had found her voice. She began participating in class, offering insights that drew on her experiences. She joined the school's self-defense club, where her skills made her a valuable asset. She even started a mentoring program for younger students who had been bullied, teaching them how to stand up for themselves. The torn scarf was beyond repair, but Luella kept it with her grandfather's carvings. They were a reminder of the day she had learned to honor his memory, not just by cherishing his gifts, but by living by the principles he had taught her. Bryn, meanwhile, learned a lesson that would stay with her. She began to see that real strength wasn't about putting others down, but about lifting them up. She started volunteering at a local youth center, working with kids who were struggling with the same insecurities she had faced. The confrontation by the bike racks became legendary at Crestwood, not as a fight, but as a lesson in dignity, restraint, and the true meaning of strength. Students who had once stood by began to speak out, inspired by Luella's example. Luella had discovered that her grandfather's legacy wasn't just in the carvings he had made, but in the values he had instilled in her. She had learned that true strength comes not from the ability to inflict pain, but from the wisdom to know when such strength is necessary, and the courage to use it only when all other options are exhausted. The quiet girl who had once tried to disappear had become someone who stood up not just for herself, but for those who needed protection. She had learned that the greatest victory lies not in defeating your enemies, but in inspiring them to become better than they were. 23,451 characters.